last summer in June, Lumpur Sumedho was visiting Abhayagiri, spent a number of weeks with us, and offered a number of reflections and a couple of question and answer periods, and one of them was for the monastic community that we had over at Senti Vihara. It was a lovely session of question and answers for, I think, at least an hour and a half or so. And I was listening to the recording of that the past week or so, little bits and pieces at a time. Had a lot of rich material, a lot of good reflections, a lot of things to contemplate, and I've been doing that a bit, and it's been coinciding a little bit with our readings on the five khandas for the winter retreat, which we started this past week. We've had a number of sutta readings and discussions, as well as from some other modern-day authors, texts from Bhikkhu Bodhi and Ajahn Sucitto and Bhikkhu Analayo, as well as the sutta discussions. So it's been a rich time delving into starting anyway, to delve into the five khandas as tools for reflection. And the question, one of the questions that stimulated some very interesting reflections from Lumpur Sumedho was when Ajahn Chunda actually asked the question regarding how he was, I can't remember exactly how the question was phrased, but in relation to the fact that his sister, Ajahn Sumedho's sister, was in the process of dying, and I can't remember if by the time that Q&A session happened, if she had already passed or she was still dying. But
I don't think she passed that point.
She hadn't passed away yet, but he had gone up to visit her in Vancouver, Washington, and realizing that she wasn't going to be living much longer, spent some time there visiting, saying goodbyes essentially, and then I think she died about 6 days after he returned here and he went back up there. But anyway, the question was what kind of reflections he might have around death with this happening with his sister so close at hand. And he gave some very nice reflections related to the five khandas, of course, but he was talking more through the lens of the 10 fetters, particularly the first 3 fetters, as the Buddha talks about the obstructions, these fetters, sanyojana, in relation to how they obstruct us from being liberated from the cycles of samsara, being liberated from suffering. And it was a little bit, I had to think about a lot of the things that he was saying to try and see how they piece together, but maybe before I mention one of the salient points that caught my attention, just to review, in case people aren't completely familiar with the 10 fetters, what they mean. There's many different ways that the Buddha talks about obstructions in our practice. The first part of our retreat was doing readings on the 5 hindrances, which is one of the set of obstructions in practice. And the 10 fetters is a different way of expressing some of these more as I said, the fetters that keep us bound to the cycles of birth and death and the suffering that comes through existing, essentially. And the first of these 10 fetters is what's called Sakkaya Ditthi, personality view, identity view, essentially the belief that we there is a self, a substantial self that can be found within any of the five khandhas, the five aggregates, or some combination, or all of them, of form, the body, and mind, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. These total of five khandhas constitute what we would call body and mind, and any form of identification with them as I am this, or I own this, or I am part of this, or this is part of me. Any form of identification with them promotes this sense of a substantial entity of self. And attachment to that view, or as Ajahn Sumedho referred to it as attachment to ego, is one of these fetters. Another one is what we call silabhata paramasa, or attachment to rules and conventions. Oftentimes, I think in the time of the Buddha, they were referring to certain rites and rituals that various wanderers and ascetics of that time would practice in a way of purifying the heart, purifying the mind, to lead to freedom. And attachment to those particular rites or rituals in and of themselves is considered a fetter, and can't really do the trick of freeing the heart. But in a more broad sense, and again, this is another teaching that I've heard from Luang Por Sumedho, and broadening that definition of sila bhatta paramasa to include attachment to views and opinions, attachment to conventions like religion, identifying oneself as a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist, and particularly when it gets to comparing, saying one is better than the other, or only my way is right, everyone else is wrong. Those kinds of views and attachments around religion can be considered a form of silabhata paramasa, or things like conventions like culture, race, gender, and I think even family. Sometimes, people who don't necessarily have a strong religious faith or belief or culture, a clan that they identify with, maybe a more humanistic philosophy, and become attached to the concept of family being sort of the place to take refuge, find meaning, ultimate meaning in life. So any attachment to conventions or forms beyond just the notion of the five khandhas of self are a fetter to realizing freedom. And then of the three fetters, a third one being vicikicca, doubt, which is often, I think, kind of a result, in a sense, of the first two, attachment to ego, attachment to rules and conventions, and things like that. And Ajahn Sumedho he was talking about doubt in this particular talk that he was giving as due to excessive thinking, which I thought was kind of quite clever observation, that, whether it's an actual proximate cause or whether it's just part of the situation, I'm not quite sure, but you certainly see it when there is doubt going on, is this constant nattering of the mind and wondering, what is this all about? Is this the right thing? Am I in the right path? Am I doing it right? Am I capable? Maybe I'm not. Maybe I should try something else. Maybe I should try another approach. All of these kinds of entanglements when we aren't clear about what we're doing and the effects of it early in the practice often. A lot of questioning that manifests as this constant verbal gnashing in our heads over and over again, which just exacerbates the doubt. So these are the first three fetters that are talked about. And just to kind of finish off with the 10 fetters, make sure people are clear on what they are. The fourth and fifth fetters of sensual desire, kama raga, and vyapada, which is ill will, aversion. Those are the fourth and fifth fetters to freedom, obstructing us from freedom. And then rupa raga and arupa raga, a kind of a lust for or desire for existence in the material realm or the fine material realm, existence for being as a, or attachment to being, wanting, desire for becoming existence for those two. And then the last three of restlessness, kind of a subtle restlessness of not being able to kind of completely settle the mind for clarity. The view, mana, asmi mana, the view, the subtle form of conceit, the subtle form of I am, the sense of I am, even if we've eliminated the identity view of the first fetter, the very subtle sense of I am, like we've talked about in some of the suttas. And then the final fetter of ignorance, not knowing and fully penetrating the Four Noble Truths. So these are the 10 fetters that keep us bound in samsara. But what Ajahn Sumedho was saying, back to the question at hand, is that he was reflecting on death and where he was, which was in a state of not particularly fearing it in any way. And reflecting, of course, the sadness of losing his last family member, his sister, but also relating it to how people can get wrapped up in the whole fear cycle around dying. And it's, what he says is that it's through, how do you phrase it? Not being able to see through the artificial conditioning of the first three fetters, as opposed to the other seven fetters as being more natural to the form of being a human being. That the first three fetters are what he referred to again as artificial conditioning. And I had to think about that a lot because I thought it was quite interesting, and he did go on to talk about it a bit more in some general ways and some specific ways. But as I pondered it and as I thought about it, I realized, and just going back to the root of the word artificial conditioning, that these three fetters are sort of artifices, constructs that are built upon the other seven fetters that are more natural to the human form. And not that those seven fetters are inherent to the human form, because we can transcend those fetters. The Arahant has transcended all 10 fetters. So they're not inherent to the human form, human existence, but the first three fetters are actually built on top of those other ones. They're artifices, artificial conditioning. And it made a lot of sense when I kind of framed it in that way, to me anyway, in that those seven fetters of sensual desire and ill will and the subtle forms of self, holding a sense of self, and the ignorance, and the wish for the wish for being, just the wish for existence, are what essentially we're born with as human beings. Those are the bases for birth as a human being. And that the first three fetters are add-ons that we actually, through the conceptual process, develop this view of who I am based in relation to this body and mind. We build that on top of the basic structure. We develop a sense of identity around groups, culture, family, religion, rites and rituals. That's an artifice built on top of the basic structure again. And then all the constant reviewing and questioning that's based on those artifices that we've built up around identity as the support or the nutriment for doubt, seeding this very crippling kind of mental quality we call doubt that prevents us from having any kind of sense of direction or confidence. So that these are artifices built on top of the basic fabrications of being, as being born as a human being. And I thought, framed in that way, that it was actually kind of a brilliant observation on his part, and a real important reflection, because as most of us know, if we eliminate those first three fetters and see through the illusion of the five khandhas as being self or related to self, if we overcome our attachments to ego in that way, if we overcome our attachment to the structures around us that we identify with, the culture and the politics even, and the family, if we can let go of our attachment, our clinging to those, and eliminate also the doubt, then we are solidly on the path to freedom. As we all know, this is what's called stream entry, firmly and in a sense, irreversibly on the way. And this is no small understanding, but it is something that we can realize, and we can realize it in this lifetime with continuing effort. And then, you often hear that stream entry is 80% of the practice. And maybe that's true, but I think that last 20% is a pretty big 20% too, with the continuance of having to deal with sensual desire and ill will and all the subtle forms of conceit and just the attachment to existence in and of itself. There's some hardy work that needs to be done for that last 20%, if that's indeed the case. But overcoming that artificial conditioning is our first step to freedom, and serves, in particular relation to Ajahn Sumedho's talking about his sister's passing and his feelings about death, that if we want to uproot that fear of death, then the best way is by eliminating any sense of identity with our body and our mind, because that's what we fear losing. We fear losing our contact with existence. What does it all mean if we don't have a sense of what the path is all about. So we're looking for that conviction, that sense of stability that comes from eliminating our attachment to worldly conventions and to this sense of self. So that's the culmination of our practice in examining the five khandhas, which is what we've been talking about the past week in our readings. And the first level being this initial penetration beyond personality view, and then using the same contemplations to take us all the way to full realization. Elimination of all of the 10 fetters. I heartily recommend, if we have access to it, I'm not sure where it is on our website, but maybe listening to that Q&A session again. It was just very, very rich. So the one of the approaches that we take, of course, is the contemplation of the five khandhas, as we've been reading and discussing, by examining each of these five aggregates one by one to see if we can see and experience deeply and fully penetrate what it is that the notion of what we take to be ourselves through the lens of Dhamma, and watching very closely within our meditation, within our contemplation, as we quiet the mind, as we still the mind, to turn to observing and experiencing the body as it arises in our minds, as experiences of the body persist and as they pass away. Watching the different aspects of bodily experience, bodily sensation, the breathing process as it ebbs and flows, the heartbeat as it contracts and relaxes, the automatic nature of bodily experience, the metabolic forces, the subtle movements of the body, the twitching of the muscles, all of these things as they arise, as they persist, as they pass away, just stepping back and seeing it all happen as a process that the body in its own intelligence goes through according to its natural laws, and reflecting on how much control do we really have over that. And not just as an intellectual exercise, but actually sitting there in the present moment, watching the body doing what a body does without any particular control on our part or need to control. The body has its own intelligence. And to observe that in our meditation. And then we'll see the arising, ceasing, the anicca aspect, the anatta, the lack of ultimate control, and the inherent unsatisfactoriness if we are trying to take refuge in some sort of stability in regards to the body, because it's constantly changing, it's aging, it experiences illness, and it will pass, it will die. So taking that as a very deep contemplation to bring it in over and over and over again, and the similar with the other aggregates, the aggregate of feeling, watching pleasant feelings arise and pass away and morph into unpleasant feelings which arise, pass away, which morph back into pleasant feelings, or neutral feelings where there's not much of experience of pleasant or pain, just one after another, just being with them in the present moment. Or perceptions, the ephemeral nature of our experience of the world around us, how we interpret it, the patterns, the habits, the opinions that come from them, classifications of ourselves, how we view ourselves, how we view others, creating our world, and how that is constantly changing, and how mistaken we are about many of our assumptions. Where did that perception of this person being a difficult person or someone who's a problem go to when that changes into a pleasant experience, a good interaction you had with them, all of a sudden they're a different being? Where did that perception go? Watching the instability of that whole realm of the world around us, or the ways we react to these perceptions and feelings through creation of new ideas, patterns, creating new patterns through body, speech, or mind, the ways that we actively construct our world and the patterns that we do experience and the feelings through the volitional formations, sankhara. And then just the constant weaving of our reality through the divided knowing of vijnana, consciousness, that constantly is weaving the illusion from all of the sense bases to form what we would call a coherent whole, and the sense of identity that comes from that. So constantly experiencing, reviewing, reflecting on these five khandhas is our way towards detaching from having a sense of identity around any of them. And when we do that, we get this result of the mind, or I should say the awareness, or just this quality of knowing separating from the object itself. This is what Ajahn Chah refers to often, and also Ajahn Sumedho, others, that and it was the fundamental realization that Ajahn Chah had in his very brief encounter with Lumpur Mun, Ajahn Mun, was getting the teaching and realizing and experiencing deeply this, the mind as being one thing, or essentially the awareness, the knowing quality, which is the fundamental attribute of citta, knowing, the knowing quality, as being separate from the objects of mind. So allowing that experience of just knowing the objects as separate, or knowing the quality of knowing as separate from the objects that the knowing is attending to, or that the knowing knows, I guess. And when that's experienced, the perception of self in relation to any of these objects, any of these five aggregates, falls away. You see them as independently operating through causes and conditions that have been set in motion, but not with a fundamental agent as part of it, not with the perception of self that's controlling all of this. And that's our entry into the elimination of that personality view or identity view, sakkaya ditthi. And then we extrapolate that to seeing the emptiness of the attachment to the rules and conventions, or the different identifications with groups that we have, and it leads to release from doubt. So this, if we take this contemplation of the five khandhas to heart, and keep on working with that within the context of a quiet, still mind that sees clearly, then this whole notion of me in relation to the body and the mind drops, and we see through the illusion. It doesn't mean that we've eliminated the subtle forms of conceiving of self, which is only done in the fruition, a path and fruition to arahantship. But that gross, we can't any longer believe that there is a self that we have to find, that we have to understand, that we have to improve, that we have to liberate. I think as Ajahn Sumedho has said also, you can't liberate the personality. The personality isn't, you're not able to liberate the personality, you're liberating the heart, the citta. And then all the other attachments will start to fall away too. And it doesn't mean that, again, that we don't have a fair amount of work to do because those more basic underlying tendencies towards desire, sense desire, ill will, and the craving for becoming, bhava tanha, are very deep, and take some time to process and free ourselves from. But we can do it so much more easily if we're not identifying with them, blaming ourselves or thinking of ourselves as inherently sinful because we have these other afflictions that were based on habits, based on kamma, and acting on these desires and aversions. So the work to be done, the remaining work to be done, becomes so much easier without that form of identification and questioning and doubt. And with the elimination of those first three fetters, or the transcendence of them, the seeing through them, this artificial conditioning, these artifices built on the rest of it all, then there comes this sense of confidence. We know we've got work to do, but we have confidence, faith, essentially, that the path that the Buddha taught is how we can actualize that understanding. It's not a blind faith, but it is based on experience. We've put enough of the teachings into practice and seen the results of it that we feel confident that even though we've got a ways to go, that this is the right direction, and we can't be fooled otherwise. We can't be drawn from that. We won't be pulled into doubt. So essentially overcoming that fetter of doubt establishes us quite strongly in confidence, faith, saddha, as we call it, that we're going in the right direction, and that we won't fall away from that, no matter how long it takes. And any kind of anxiety or fear over death of this body, death of this mind, evaporates when we see that it's not who we are. So anyway, I just really enjoying that kind of contemplation, coming together of our readings and discussions around the five khandhas and where it can take us, and also Luangpo Sumedho's reflections on the attachment that we experience through the first three fetters, the artificial conditioning that we once we eliminate that, we're well on the road to seeing the fruits of the path. So I'll just leave that for a few reflections tonight.